On September 13, 1982, a dark green Rover wound its way along the narrow mountain roads above Monaco. Behind the wheel was Grace Kelly, the Hollywood star who had once glided across the French Riviera on screen with effortless elegance. But this time, there were no cameras, no director, and no second take. In a single terrifying moment, the car left the road and plunged down the rocky hillside. The woman who had spent her life appearing perfectly composed could no longer control the story. By the next morning, Princess Grace was gone. Millions mourned the loss of a princess, but few stopped to ask a more haunting question. When Grace Kelly became everything the world admired, how much of the woman she had fought to become was left behind? Hello, my friends, and welcome to Woven English. Take a slow breath, let your shoulders relax, and allow this story to carry you away from the sunlit cliffs of Monaco and back to Philadelphia many years earlier. Inside a large stone house, a quiet, delicate girl watched a family built around strength, discipline, and achievement. Her father was an Olympic champion and a successful businessman. Her brothers and sisters were confident, energetic, and easy to notice. Grace was different. She loved books, beautiful clothes, the theater, and the private worlds created by imagination. In a family that admired trophies and physical courage, her gifts were softer and harder to measure. Grace was loved, but she often felt unseen. Grace Patricia Kelly was born on November 12, 1929, into one of Philadelphia's most successful families. Her father had won 3 Olympic gold medals, and achievement was the language he understood best. Around the dinner table, strength, competition, and victory filled the conversation. Grace often listened quietly, holding thoughts she did not yet know how to express. She was frequently ill, disliked sports, and preferred books, drawing, and school plays. In a family of powerful personalities, her gifts were easy to overlook. But Grace was beginning to discover something important. On a stage, quietness was not weakness. Under the lights, she could speak without being interrupted, become someone impossible to dismiss, and finally make the room turn toward her. Determined to follow her own path, Grace left Philadelphia for New York to study at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. To support herself, she worked as a model, posed for magazine advertisements, and accepted small television roles while spending long hours perfecting her craft. Directors quickly noticed something unusual. Grace did not need dramatic gestures to command attention. With a quiet voice, steady gaze, and effortless elegance, she could fill an entire screen. Hollywood soon came calling. Films like High Noon, Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, and To Catch a Thief transformed her into one of the brightest stars of the 1950s. In only a few years, the quiet young woman from Philadelphia became one of the most recognizable faces in the world. But the quality that made her unforgettable was not beauty alone. It was the feeling that something powerful was being held beneath the surface, a fire hidden behind perfect calm. Hollywood had finally noticed Grace. Soon, it would reward her with its highest honor. The night of the 27th Academy Awards should have been the happiest moment of Grace Kelly's life. Surrounded by Hollywood's biggest stars, she walked onto the stage with quiet confidence as her name echoed through the theater. At just 25 years old, she had won the Academy Award for Best Actress for The Country Girl. The applause seemed endless, and millions would remember the elegant young woman holding an Oscar with her signature grace. It was the ultimate dream for any actress. The quiet girl from Philadelphia had finally conquered Hollywood. For one shining moment, she held the proof she had spent her whole life searching for. Her quiet gifts had value, and the world could no longer overlook her. Yet the award arrived at the very moment another life was beginning to call her away. Grace had finally become the woman she wanted the world to see. Soon, she would be asked to leave that woman behind. In May 1955, Grace traveled to the Cannes Film Festival as one of Hollywood's brightest stars. During the visit, she was invited to Monaco for a carefully arranged meeting with Prince Rainier III. The prince was serious, private, and responsible for the future of a tiny country. Grace arrived after delays, dressed simply, expecting little more than a formal photograph. But the meeting lasted longer than planned. Their first meeting was formal, slightly awkward, and arranged for the press. Yet something continued after the cameras were gone. Letters crossed the Atlantic, and Rainier later traveled to America to meet the Kelly family. When he proposed, Grace was offered something Hollywood could never give her: permanence, family, and a place in history. But accepting meant more than becoming a wife. It meant choosing between the identity she had built and a future that would require her to become someone entirely new. On April 19, 1956, the world stopped to watch what many called the wedding of the century. Millions followed as Grace Kelly, Hollywood's most elegant actress, walked through St. Nicholas Cathedral wearing a breathtaking gown of lace and silk. Church bells rang across Monaco, crowds filled the streets, and cameras captured every smile. It looked like the perfect fairy tale, a movie star becoming a real princess. But when Grace exchanged her Oscar-winning career for a royal title, she was giving up far more than Hollywood. As she stepped out of the cathedral as Princess Grace of Monaco, she was not simply beginning a marriage. She was leaving behind a role she had chosen for one that history, duty, and an entire nation would now expect her to play without interruption. To the world, Grace Kelly had gained everything: a palace, a title, and a life beyond imagination. But inside the palace, she began learning the cost of her new role. Film scripts no longer arrived with the promise of possibility. Public appearances were planned carefully, and every expression carried the weight of Monaco's reputation. There could be no careless words, no visible frustration, and no moment when the princess simply stopped being watched. Grace had left Hollywood, but performance had not left her. The difference was that movie roles ended when the director called cut. This role followed her through palace corridors, public ceremonies, family photographs, and even the quietest parts of her private life. She had stopped acting for a camera, only to begin performing without a final scene. Away from the cameras and royal ceremonies, Grace found her greatest happiness in being a mother. She and Prince Rainier raised 3 children: Caroline, Albert, and Stephanie, and she worked hard to give them moments of warmth and normality, despite life inside a palace. Grace read bedtime stories, encouraged their creativity, and treasured quiet family time whenever royal duties allowed. In those private moments, Grace did not need to be elegant, composed, or historically important. She could worry, laugh, correct, comfort, and love without considering how the moment might appear in a photograph. The world called her Your Serene Highness. Her children called her Mom. Inside a life built around ceremony, motherhood gave Grace something rare: a relationship in which she did not need to earn attention, protect an image, or become anyone other than herself. Years after leaving Hollywood, the past came knocking on Grace's door. Alfred Hitchcock, the legendary director who had helped make her a star, invited her to return for his new film, Marnie. For the first time in years, Grace seriously considered acting again. She read the script, imagined herself back on a movie set, and wondered if the actress inside her had truly disappeared. For a moment, she could almost hear the familiar sounds again: the movement of the crew, the director's instructions, and the silence before a scene began. It was not simply another film offer. It was a door opening toward the person she had once been. But the announcement sparked criticism in Monaco. Many believed a reigning princess should not return to the silver screen. Grace eventually withdrew from the film. The decision revealed a painful truth. Hollywood had not forgotten her, and the actress inside her had not disappeared. But Princess Grace no longer possessed the freedom to answer when that former life called. The curtain had not fallen because she had lost her talent. It had fallen because the role she now carried would not allow her to return. Grace could not return to the stage she had lost, so she began creating stages for others. She supported theater, cultural programs, and young artists who were still searching for their own voices. Through Monaco's Red Cross and organizations devoted to children, she turned royal visibility into practical service. The cameras still followed her, but the attention no longer needed to end with Grace herself. She could direct it toward an artist, a child, or a family that needed help. Hollywood had once given her a spotlight. In Monaco, she learned how to share it. She was no longer performing stories for an audience. She was helping other people begin their own. One image captured the contradiction at the center of Grace's life more clearly than almost any other. In 1956, photographers captured Princess Grace carrying the leather bag in front of her body to shield her early pregnancy from the cameras. It was a simple, deeply personal gesture. Yet the world saw something else. The photographs spread across newspapers and magazines, and soon the bag became forever known as the Kelly bag. It was more than a fashion accessory. Grace had lifted the bag to protect something private. The world responded by turning that private gesture into another permanent part of her public image. Even when she tried to hide, the image of Grace Kelly became larger. By the early 1980s, Grace appeared to have brought the two halves of her life into balance. She was a respected princess, a devoted mother, a patron of the arts, and a symbol of elegance known around the world. Hollywood still remembered the actress, while Monaco had fully embraced its princess. From the outside, the conflict seemed resolved. Grace had found ways to keep art, service, and family inside the life she had chosen. Perhaps the actress and the princess had not defeated each other after all. Perhaps they had finally learned to live together. Then, on an ordinary September afternoon, Grace began what should have been a familiar drive home. On September 13, 1982, Grace and her youngest daughter, Princess Stephanie, began the familiar drive from their family home back to Monaco. It was a route Grace had traveled many times before. But somewhere along the winding mountain road, tragedy struck. The car suddenly left the pavement, crashed through a barrier, and tumbled down the steep hillside. Stephanie survived with injuries. Grace was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to save her life. The following evening, at the age of 52, Princess Grace passed away. Hollywood had lost one of its brightest stars, and Monaco had lost its beloved princess. A journey that began with dreams beneath the lights of a movie studio ended quietly on a narrow mountain road. Overlooking the Mediterranean, a heartbreaking ending no screenwriter could have imagined. The news spread across the world with heartbreaking speed. Hollywood mourned the loss of one of its most unforgettable actresses, while the people of Monaco grieved the princess who had served them with quiet dignity for more than 25 years. Thousands gathered outside the prince's palace, laying flowers in silent tribute. Actors, world leaders, and ordinary families shared the same sorrow. Grace Kelly had spent her life divided between two worlds, and, in death, both claimed her as their own. Hollywood remembered the young woman whose stillness could command a screen. Monaco mourned the princess who had spent more than 25 years serving beside its prince. Her children had lost neither an icon nor a legend, but their mother. For the first time, the actress, the princess, and the private woman were spoken of together. Not as separate roles, but as one unfinished life. Perhaps that is why her story still touches millions today. When people remember Grace Kelly, they see the Oscar, the wedding gown, the palace, and the handbag that still carries her name. But every one of those images belongs to a role the world asked her to play. Behind them was a quiet girl who had worked patiently to find her own voice, an actress who became impossible to overlook, and a woman who surrendered that freedom for love, duty, and a different kind of purpose. Grace did not simply leave acting behind. She entered a role from which there was no complete escape. Her story reminds us that becoming everything the world admires does not always make us free. Never let the role become more important than the person living inside it. And so, my friends, the story of Grace Kelly comes to its close. Which grace stayed with you most? The quiet girl searching for her voice, the actress holding her Oscar, the bride walking into a palace, or the woman who spent the rest of her life balancing duty with the self she had left behind. Tell me in the comments, do you believe Grace found a new purpose, or did the role of princess cost her too much of who she had been? This is Woven English, where every life becomes a story, and every story brings us closer to the language. Until next time, take care of yourself, keep listening, and never stop learning.